We all have childhood memories that feel so vivid, but you just can't place your finger on it. You remember watching a show and remember loving it, but can't recall the name or what ended up happening to it. For me, it was a series about a girl driving a spaceship against aliens to win the universe's ultimate prize. I was probably only around 9 or 10 when I saw it, but I could never get it out of my head. It was something so different from anything I'd ever seen before, and for some reason, I never encountered it again. Nobody I knew had ever seen it, and anytime I brought it up, they would always say that they had never heard of it. But that image of a girl with red hair, a star on her cheek, and really stupid-looking boobs could never escape me. It's like it was seared into the back of my mind, and it remained there for years. I was always hoping I would see it again, but I had no idea what it was, and eventually I just convinced myself it was something that would be lost to me forever. Until I remembered the internet existed. Oh, Oban Star Racers. So that's it. Revisiting something you loved from childhood is generally not a good idea, but recently I've been on a big nostalgia kick. Blame the pandemic or me being in my mid-20s, but I've needed that warm fuzzy feeling of my childhood again, and Oban was a significant part of it. Like I said, I held on to the memory of this show for a long time, and when I decided to rewatch it, I was genuinely worried that it wouldn't hold up, which is how most things from childhood are. However, I'm surprised to say that it does hold up really well, actually. So let's get into it. Oban Star Racers is a French-Japanese anime series from 2006. The story follows Ava Wei. After her birthday passes without a call from her estranged father, she runs away from her strict boarding school on a homemade rocket scooter to go see him for the first time in 10 years. Her father, Don Wei, is a famous racing manager, and when Ava finally finds him, he doesn't recognize her. So she disguises herself under the name Molly and is offered a job as a mechanic. Don is tasked by the president to create the ultimate racing team to compete in a 10,000-year annual intergalactic race to fight for the ultimate prize and the power to put an end to the hostilities between Earth and a violent race of aliens called the Krogs. But Molly secretly stows away on their ship as the Earth is being transported off-planet, and therefore becomes part of their team. But before we get too far into the world of Oban, we need a better understanding of the characters. The cast of characters on Oban are surprisingly diverse, and that's not just because most of them are aliens. For example, Ava, now Molly, is a really strong female character. Despite the blatant sexism from everyone around her, she remains steadfast in her convictions.
Molly, you wouldn't be jealous of Rick, would you?
She's hot-headed, unapologetic, and confident, but with an enormous amount of compassion for the people around her, even when they don't deserve it. For the early 2000s especially, I feel like we didn't get a lot of characters like her. She's a mechanic, a naturally gifted pilot, and never afraid to speak her mind. I love that about her. I think she's a great character. She isn't flawless, and that's the point. She's real. Those flaws come from her past of losing her mother and being abandoned by her father shortly after, and the anger that she holds towards him.
Please don't leave me too, Daddy.
Now I need to get this out of the way. There are few things that ruin a series more for me than the dead mom trope. It's an overused, lazy way of giving a character a tragic past at the expense of other female characters. However, I will give it a pass this time because it plays such a big role in the series. This story couldn't have happened without the death of her mother, and it actually carries a large narrative purpose. Molly actually doesn't even mention her mother as a factor in her decision to race at all, despite the fact that her mother was a famous pilot who died in a racing accident. But it was actually purely to get closer to her father, and that motivation doesn't change until about the halfway point of the series. An issue I do have with the character is in the design. Molly is a visually unique character, and at first I was really intrigued by her style and clothing, as when we first are introduced to her, she's wearing a male uniform as opposed to the female ones, reinforcing her strong-willed personality and affinity for more male-dominated hobbies like mechanics. Unfortunately, it's quickly done away with for a very, very cropped shirt and ridiculously low-waisted pants. To give the artist some slack, it wasn't uncommon to see characters in similar outfits in media for this time period. For example, Kim Possible, Bratz, Totally Spies, and most especially Winx Club. That one's the most egregious of all of them, and I might even touch on in a later video. And I'm no Puritan. As long as you're dealing with these characters in a non-sexualized way, I think it's fine. But unfortunately, when the only other recurring female characters in your show look like this, well, it just doesn't feel very respectful. Plus, need I mention one more time, the boobs? Just, why do they look like that? Anyway, moving on. Now to get to the foil to Ava's confidence, the whole reason she's racing, the instigator to every conflict, the world's worst dad, Don Way, manager of the Earth's racing team.
Today was a sure win. We lost because you didn't stick to the plan. Come back here, young lady! Do you hear me? I hope you realize that I never trusted you to pilot the Arrow. Because I have never seen a more terrible race in my entire career.
After the death of his wife Maya, Don abandons Ava to the Stern boarding school and restarts his life as if they had never existed. He becomes a raging sexist, believing that women should never be pilots under any circumstances, and holds Molly to an impossible-to-reach standard. He is not quiet about his disdain for her racing, even though she is a clearly naturally gifted pilot. He does grow throughout the series, but I don't think we ever get a full reform from him, but merely an attempt to start doing better, which, with a character like this, that's about the best you can ask for. He does make for a good emotional antagonist for Molly to work against. Then there's Rick, the actual pilot for the Earth team. You see, Molly only starts to race as a temporary replacement for Rick after he gets into a crash when their ship is sabotaged. Now, I don't know if it's because of the way he's designed or because of how he was introduced, but I was fully expecting him to be a grade A prick. Like, I thought that he was going to be an overconfident, bitter old racer that wasn't willing to pass the baton on to a younger and better pilot. But in reality, he is easily the nicest character, especially to Molly. He's the only one on their entire team that sees the potential she has and is the only one to trust her opinion. But after the crash during their first race, he becomes permanently injured. He then takes this opportunity to teach Molly and guide her. He's in many ways the true father figure that she needs. He was even the one who figured out her real identity well before her own dad ever did.
You've got good technique, good speed, and great reflexes. Why aren't you doing better?
I'm doing my best. I'm just a girl, remember?
Don't play that game with me. Huh? You're a star racer pilot, a pilot for the Earth team. What's holding you back?
I was honestly surprised at how much I ended up liking Rick. One of my favorite moments in the show is actually with him. After he learns that he will never be able to fly again, he not only loses his career, but his sense of purpose. So he takes a quiet moment to himself to reminisce on the life and career that just ended for him, and he cries. It's really touching to see this masculine character have an emotional moment to just grieve. I don't think that's something you see very often, and to me, it was really impactful. Overall, Rick is an awesome character. It's nice that we have one person on Molly's side, and the relationship between them is really great to watch unfold.
Rick? Thank you.
The next member of the Earth team is Jordan. He is a loyal and eager to help young man working as the gunman for the starship. He starts off with the same attitude towards Molly that everyone does. He's dismissive and less than respectful to her, but the more that they work together, they eventually develop a mutual trust and bond. It's fun to watch the relationship grow as the series goes on, and it's a pretty natural progression of things. And it's endlessly entertaining to watch him get rejected over and over and over.
Maybe we should sit, closer to one another. Like they say, one Eskimo under a blanket freezes, two Eskimos under a blanket live.
Well, this Eskimo dies.
As for the last two members of the Earth team, we have Stan and Koji. These two aren't particularly relevant to the story. They don't spend any time with the main characters other than assisting with the race and repairing the ship. There's only one time we really ever see them spending time with Molly that isn't just part of their job, and it's very short-lived. I wish we could have seen them more, but unfortunately these two are delegated to being a little bit more than background characters and at worst, just commentary for Dawn.
Think about it. Koji and I are just simple mechanics. We were never meant to fly.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We're just mechanics.
When it comes to the alien characters, there are so many interesting ones. The main one there is to talk about would be Prince Aika. He befriends Molly on the first day of the race, and they have a playful banter throughout the show. His character is probably one of the more two-dimensional ones as well. He's a nice guy with strong morals and code of honor, but because of the political climate on his home planet, he's forced to do a lot of things that he doesn't want to. He has an internal struggle between wanting to be a good friend and honorable person, but also having a duty to go along with the plans that he knows aren't right to protect his home planet from the Krog invaders.
The prince will do as you have requested.
I am pleased to hear this. Earth must be taught a lesson.
The Krogs are the same aliens threatening Earth, and the whole reason the Earth team is even racing is to stop them from gaining the ultimate prize and keeping them from gaining any more power. If the Krogs win, they plan to use the prize to continue their reign of terror and take over more and more planets. A big part of what makes Oban special to me is the world building. The backgrounds are filled with countless different aliens of all sorts of designs. The attention to detail on these background characters is so impressive, and it makes the universe feel truly boundless with life. That extra bit of effort they put into creating what feels like a fully fledged new universe is so rewarding, and it keeps you invested and wanting more. We only get to see two different alien planets, the one hosting the preliminary races, Alwas, and of course, Oban. But they truly did do a splendid job making this world feel well-rounded and lived in, by not just the racers, but the spectators as well. In a lot of anime, you either see badly done CGI crowd scenes or just fully blacked out ones, but in this one, they're all really well done. Unfortunately, the preliminary races aren't particularly amazing. In fact, I find the whole first half of the series to be the weakest part of the show. It's frustrating to watch Molly get dismissed and ignored over and over again. It's mostly a lot of the same thing. Molly tries to prove herself as a pilot, the rest of the team won't take her seriously, and then she gets angry and either storms off or locks herself in her room. The races are also always on the same track, and while some have special rules to make them more interesting, like the shooting gallery or an arena race, they get pretty monotonous pretty quickly. But that's not to say every race is boring. There are plenty that have great visuals, interesting opponents, and unexpected outcomes. But when the races do get boring, there's very little they can do to make up for it. I think the series could have benefited from cutting down some of the earlier episodes and condensing them to like 8 or 9 instead of 13. Far too many of the races become forgettable, and the problems often repeat themselves. I just found the pacing to be a little bit too slow. One thing I do appreciate about the preliminary races, and most of the races on Oban 2 for that matter, is that the Earth team is rarely within the top teams. Most of the races are pretty close calls, which means they have to give everything they have every time. They even have a substantial losing streak that very nearly cost them their chance at going to Oban. But once the team actually does get to Oban, that's when the series has its real turning point and the story begins to really pick up momentum. I think of Oban as less of a location and more of a character. We've been hearing about Oban from the very beginning. It's the big important place that every planet in the galaxy wants their hand at reaching. It is so damn important that it's literally in the name. It's not Molly Star Racer anymore, it's Oban. It takes a lot for them to get there, but once they finally do in episode 14, it really lives up to the hype. The scope of this planet is enormous. Being described as much larger than our own sun, it has so many vast and incredible landscapes that are used to make each race new and exciting. The races are no longer who can get to the line first, but instead a points collecting match, and the person with the most points wins. That means it's not always the strongest and fastest competitors gaining the most points, but sometimes the most agile or the most clever. This, combined with the wildly different terrain for each match, makes races where it could really be anyone's win at any given time. And these races are all the more fun to watch because of it. There's also a lot of hidden lore within Oban. There are many strange creatures living on the planet, but no intelligent life forms left. With the countless ruins and pieces of left-behind technology, it really tells a story of a once thriving planet with plenty of living people and intelligence. So what happened to them? Now, in the second half of the series, all the previously set up storylines finally start to reach their climax. There are plenty of different plot points finally coming to head. Dawn finally starts questioning Molly's true identity. Ica has the choice to stand up and fight for his honor or obey the Krogs to spare his people. Feelings for Molly start to blossom within Jordan. The true identity of the Avatar is in question, as well as what the ultimate prize actually is. There's a mysterious figure manipulating events from the shadows. The Krog Empire's impeding takeover is drawing nearer, and finally, who will win the race and what's going to happen when they do? The pacing in this arc is much better than the previous one on Alwas. With each episode, we learn a little bit more about these events, or we build character development, and unlike many other series this ambitious, it actually sticks the landing pretty well. It's a bittersweet end that left me wanting a little bit more, but overall, really glad I watched it. The landscape of animation from the early 2000s was very different from how it is now. It's easy to look back on shows from this time period with nostalgia glasses and forget about all the stuff that had questionable subject matter or looked a little uncanny, especially when integrating CGI into 2D spaces. Now, I have a lot of thoughts on this subject that I won't get into too much detail here, but for the record, I am in the group of CGI hopefuls. While I appreciate and want to preserve the magic of 2D animation, I'm by no means a 2D purist. I think that when handled with care, CGI can be really beneficial and even beautiful. However, it is really hard to pull off, and for every land of the lustrous, there's a berserk to take it down a few pegs. But somehow, in what was still the Wild West of CGI integration, Oban Star Racers does a shockingly good job. It's used mostly to animate the racing, the ships, and some character actions, but it blends in with the stylized animation relatively seamlessly. It's not perfect, but 9 out of 10 times, unless you're really looking for it, you won't even notice that it's there. The animation is something I think particularly holds up well despite its age. It's again not perfect, of course. There are some cut corners and reused shots like
Can't race without a pilot.
that, and the overuse of reaction shots from inside the Star Racer ships to avoid animating complicated racing sequences can, again, make the preliminary races especially feel really repetitive to watch. Luckily, those scenes don't overstay their welcome, and I will accept them as a necessary evil to help save money for the more important moments. Another thing I do want to give props to, but I don't want to spend too much time on, is the music. It's absolutely fantastic. I am, however, horribly disappointed that they switched the original theme song that was composed by Yoko Kanno, the composer for the certified classic Cowboy Bebop, all for some crappy rock song. Whoever made that decision needs to be severely punished. The original song was perfect, and I loathe the one used for the North American broadcast. It's the only song in the entire series that I don't like. Anyway, all things considered, this series really holds up, and in my opinion, is a true hidden gem. I was so hesitant to watch this show for the longest time because I had such positive memories associated with it, and I was scared that watching it again would ruin it for me. But honestly, I am so glad that I revisited it. It's honestly tragic to me that this show was never given a fighting chance to gain popularity. Despite the critical success and the fan support for this show, it was only ever released once, and never given any reruns or a Blu-ray release. So if you didn't happen to be one of the people who caught it in its original airing, you had almost zero chance of ever seeing it again. The series had so many amazing creators behind it, and it was very different from the shows being aired in the early 2000s. Very few animated series focused on serialized narratives with strong overarching stories and character development. Which is why I'm super excited to tell you that there is currently a Kickstarter right now for the 15th anniversary Blu-ray release of the original HD format. It has reached its goal, but I want to encourage every single person who's a fan of or interested in this series even a little bit to support the Blu-ray release. Because there is a strong desire from the creators to expand Oban into a sequel or spin-off series. And these plans have been in the works since at least 2017. So if you want to see this series get the fighting chance it deserves, support the Blu-ray release. I'll be leaving a link to everything on that in the description, so at the very least, just check it out. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey of rediscovery for a long-lost love that I've been holding on to for about 15 years. If you remember watching Oban Star Racers and rediscovered it later in life, I am so curious to hear about other people's thoughts on this show, especially if you have a different opinion than me. Were you happy with the character of Molly, or did you find her super annoying? Do you also think that she has the stupidest looking boobs ever drawn, only rivaled by the daggers that are Kim Possible? I'd love to find out. If you're a returning viewer, you probably noticed this isn't what my old content used to look like. To be honest, I really wasn't happy with what I was creating, and I wanted to go in a direction that's more true to me. So thank you so much for sticking around for so long. I know it's been ages. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I have a ton more projects already in the works, and I'm really excited to be releasing those in the future. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you later.